Hi everyone. In the second video on our publishing cycle and peer review video series, I do want to talk here in video 2 about predatory journals and publishers. This is a very important topic and I want to make sure that you all are aware of what predatory journals or publishers are, how to avoid them, and how to deal with them if you come into contact with them. And even about, even the most important part is really trying to figure out what is a predatory journal and who is a predatory publisher. So I find this particular list here very useful, and I'll click on this link in a second. But Think, Check, Submit is a wonderful website that my library colleagues have talked to me about years ago. So this is a great source. There's a checklist there that can help you think through, literally think, check, submit, thinking through and looking through, evaluating if a journal might be predatory. You can submit a pre-submission inquiry, and honestly, when in doubt, you can ask your mentor, other colleagues, and also librarians. If you're at a university, affiliated with a university where there is a research librarian, they're great resources in any of this process as well. So let's take a look at this website, thinkchecksubmit.org. Give me a second until it loads here. I have tons of windows open, so ignore that. And it is not coming up. Let me try this again. Sometimes my internet is a little finicky. Oh, there it is. Thank you. So there are 2 checklists that this website has created for books and chapters, but also there's one down here for journals, and I want to take a look at that with you. They also have a video you can check out, some other great resources. They've just recently revamped their website, which I'm really happy to see because I really found this list extremely useful. As the website says, it's a tool that can help you discover what you need to know as you're assessing journals or publishers. So the checklist is right here. Have you read articles in the journal? Do you or your colleagues know the journal? Can you easily identify and contact the publisher? And I just want to mention this one here, the ISSN portal. ISSN is kind of the ISBN number for journals. And if a journal has an ISSN number, that's usually an indication that it is a reputable journal, but it's not always foolproof. And there are also plenty of journals out there that don't have an ISSN number, and they're actually really good journals to publish in. So again, do you, your colleagues know the journal? Can you identify it? Contact the publisher. So you look at the website. Does the journal's website make clear that peer review is used? And I cannot emphasize this enough, that you don't want to publish in a journal that is not peer reviewed. And I mean this, and I mean research articles. There are genres that are not peer reviewed that are published in reputable journals, like editorials or sometimes columns, or they only go through review process with maybe the journal's editor, but not through the rigorous review process, peer review process that I'm going to talk about in a later video. So hang on for that. But many of you are familiar with it already, where it gets sent out to several people in the field to review if the methodology is accurate. Is a research question valid? Are the right resources cited? Does the article make sense? Is it useful and valid research in this field? Right? Those are the criteria often. So if the journal doesn't clearly list it's using peer review, definitely stay away from that for academic purposes. But this is a big no-no. Are articles indexed or archived in dedicated services? Remember from Jane earlier, like what the journal website will tell you what indices or what indices this journal is indexed in, and that can be a real signal for a reputable journal. Is it clear what fees will be charged? And I'll talk about this in a moment, about the journal publication, like a fee for publishing in open access journals. So if there aren't clear guidelines and you start working with the journal and suddenly they drop, like with every interaction, like, oh, there's another $50 fee and there's another $1,000 fee, stay away. That is not a good sign. Reputable journals that really are interested in producing quality and publishing quality scholarly work will be very transparent about this. guidelines provided, publishers, members of any industry initiatives. There is a directory of open access journals that I recommend. There's some other ones listed here. So, right, so those are things to look for. So if you can comfortably go through these questions and say, yes, all these things I have, or they're addressed sufficiently, then you're probably you have arrived at a journal that you could consider submitting your work to. So again, very useful checklist and a great website. So check it out. Oops, that was the wrong one. There we go. So Think, Check, Submit, as I said, great resource. There's another checklist that I want to share with you, and this is really focusing on like avoiding predatory journals. Not just is this journal right for me, but again, avoiding predatory publishers and journals. And this comes from my colleague, Professor Adam Boucher, in the Department of Anatomy and Neurobiology at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. The first one is really, really, really important. Did the journal solicit the article by email? Once you published, and some of you and all of you have already maybe experienced this, you publish something and then a week later or whenever you get an email from some journal, it sounds reputable, you might not recognize it, they might not address you, you might use a different name, or they might address you, like I've gotten one that says, Dear Dr. Dr. Isabel. And I'm like, Dr. Isabel is not the professional way to address me. So they often use AI, bot technology, to kind of, mine existing publications and look for and contact folks to publish or submit their work to them. That's usually it's a strong indicator. And I can emphasize enough strong indicator that if you get an email from a journal saying, we've seen your work, blah, 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 and here, we would like you to publish something similar or this to our journal, that is extremely rare. That those will be reputable journals. Those often are predatory journals or journals that are really looking for folks to publish. And often what will happen if you were to engage with them, they will eventually ask you for money. Now, there are reputable scientists or academics who publish in those journals, and there are some journals that are sort of in a gray zone between predatory and non-predatory, and it all depends on a lot of factors. But in general, if a journal solicits an article from you, that's usually an indication that it's a predatory publisher. And the other questions here, you'll probably take a look at this. Have you read articles from the journal? Can you easily discover them? Is it clear about peer review? Again, mirroring some of the questions on the Think, Check, Submit website. Are there indexed and reputable indexing services? Is the fee structure clear? Do you know the editorial board members? And so on, and so on, and so on, right? So this is really modeled after the Think, Check, Submit. But I really like that first bullet point, the solicitation by email. That's usually a red flag. And I recently had this discussion with a colleague of mine who's been wanting to have her doctoral students of her whom I've worked with had published a narrative review in an article in a journal, and then got this email from some other journal like, oh, would you interested in publishing something similar, or maybe a report or a letter or something? And she's like, oh, any publication is good, right? And I'm like, no, it's definitely a big no-no. You ask most academic scholars or folks who work within academia, that is a big no-no. So open access publishing. So for a long time, open access, or for even sometimes today, folks confuse open access publishing with predatory publishing. And that's because a lot of predatory publishers are open access. And really the big difference is if it's open access publishing, it's it's two distinctive characteristics. Anybody can access it. I can go, if I have internet access, I access the article in open access journal. And the second one is from the writer's perspective. If you want to publish an open access journal, you have to pay the journal. It's called an article processing fee, APF, I think is the usual acronym. There might be other acronyms out there. And it can be, a couple of $1,000. So it's not just like $50. So it can be several $1,000s, especially if the journal is a widely read journal. If just FYI, side note, if you have a federal grant, either the NIH, NSF, or any other federal agency, the NEH, Endowment of the Humanities, NSF, National Science Foundation, NIH, National Institutes of Health if you have any federal money, the requirement is for research. The requirement is that you publish your findings in open access journals. So what people often do, or what researchers do, or writers do, is add a budget line to their budgets for article processing fees. It is a newer form of publishing in the academic context. It has great advantages, and I have some colleagues who only publish open access because they want their work to be read by folks, especially community-oriented researchers. I just recently went to a talk by a colleague of mine at Virginia Tech, Kenna Uluk Ichakiak. She's a Inuit researcher and writer. She's a professor of technical writing, and she also works with her communities in Alaska on climate change, preservation, data preservation issues. So she's an active community member as well as academic. And one of the comments, her and a colleague, her sister, who works for one of the research trusts, one of the community building trusts in Alaska, they both talked about how often the research that people do, especially in marginalized communities, doesn't get published in or gets published in academic journals that are behind a paywall, right? So I know folks who really are adamant about open access publishing. Many reputable journals have open access publications. So you might have the Journal of Public Health that has a open access version and a non-open access version. So one that's behind the paywall, meaning you have to have a subscription or your library has to in order to access it. And there is a link here. When you access the PowerPoint slides in the module, you can click on these just to look at some more examples. And as I mentioned, there's a cost associated with open access publishing. So that's something to be aware of. So for a long time, open access publishing was equated with predatory publishing because, oh my God, they asked me for money. How dare they? And there are some ethical conversations around money and publishing when it comes to processing fees, paying a publisher to publish your work, as well as with the peer review process around not getting paid to do a lot of work. And I'll address that about the peer review process a little later in another video. So, and I want to go into those conversations. I can see arguments on either side. In an ideal world, that we wouldn't need those costs, but it does cost money to put together a journal, right? So it's not free. Of course, many of these journals also make a big profit. That's another conversation to be had. But so the advantage though of open access publishing is also once you pay the article processing fee, the copyright stays with you as the authors. Because if you publish with a journal, and it's not open access, you don't pay this processing fee, the copyright for that work stays with the journal, not with you. You sign it over. That's a standard practice in academic and scientific publishing. That might not be of relevance to you unless you at some point want to maybe publish one of your, collection of your essays, collection of your articles in a separate monograph or book or somewhere else. You would then have to ask the publisher to give you the copyrights or the rights to do that, because you wouldn't own the copyrights. With the open access publishing, in almost all cases, you retain the copyrights because you pay for it to be published. So that's predatory publishing is predatory publishers and journals are a real threat, I believe, to the validity and the strength of academic work. There are publishers that have been specifically put out or created to undermine, let's say, scientific research on vaccine safety. And so you have journals that publish dubious, in my opinion and my assessment, dubious scientific work on how vaccines, let's say, the measles vaccine causes autism, right? This whole debate with Wakefield's article, which was published in a reputable journal and later on was found to have falsified data. But you have these groups put these journals out that look reputable. And if you're not really savvy around distinguishing that, you might end up even citing and working with work that really isn't based on a very rigorous peer review process and doesn't really engage with a variety of publications in the field.